All right, let me tell you a story. It's August 2025, and Sam Altman is standing on stage about to unveil GPT-5. The hype has been building for months. He's been dropping hints that this model is going to blow our minds, that we're getting close to AGI, that it'll have PhD-level reasoning. The tech world is holding its breath, and then it launches, and within hours, the internet isn't celebrating, they're roasting it. See, what happened next became one of the most spectacular faceplants in tech history. Not because GPT-5 was bad necessarily, but because it was so far from what was promised that even OpenAI's biggest fans couldn't spin it. The live demo had bugs, charts showed wrong numbers. The model was giving inconsistent answers, and perhaps most damning of all, it just didn't feel that much smarter than GPT-4. Here's the kicker though, you know Gary Marcus? The AI researcher who's been warning about the limitations of large language models for years? The guy Sam Altman once dismissed as a troll and a mediocre deep learning skeptic. Well, people started calling August 8th, 2025 Gary Marcus Day, because everything he'd been warning about for the past several years suddenly came true in spectacular fashion. But before we get into what went wrong, let me paint you the bigger picture of what's really happening in AI right now, because this isn't just about one failed launch. This is about a fundamental shift in the AI landscape. It's about OpenAI losing its iron grip on the market. It's about Anthropic quietly eating their lunch. And it's about Google finally waking up from its slumber and reminding everyone who's actually got the deepest pockets and the best infrastructure. So let's start with OpenAI because their story is the most dramatic. And honestly, the most troubling, you see. GPT-5 isn't actually one model. Let me repeat that because it's important. GPT-5 is not a single unified model. It's what OpenAI calls a model router. Basically a system that decides on the fly which model to use for your question. Sometimes you're talking to a big, powerful model. Sometimes you're talking to a smaller, cheaper one. And sometimes you're talking to something in between. Now on paper, this sounds smart, right? Why waste compute on easy questions when a smaller model can handle it? Save the big guns for the hard stuff makes economic sense. But here's the problem. Users had no idea this was happening. They thought they were getting consistent GPT-5 performance. What they actually got was a grab bag of different models giving different quality answers, sometimes even contradicting each other within the same conversation. Imagine ordering a premium steak at a restaurant and sometimes they serve you ribeye, sometimes ground beef, and sometimes chicken. But they never tell you which one you're getting. That's basically what OpenAI did with GPT-5 and the technical problems at launch. Man, they were embarrassing. The demo stream that was supposed to showcase all these amazing capabilities kept glitching. The AI couldn't even get basic facts right consistently. Within days, OpenAI was quietly patching the model, trying to make it warmer, less stiff. But the damage was done. First impressions matter. And GPT-5's first impression was me. Gary Marcus absolutely eviscerated it. He called it overdue, overhyped, and underwhelming. And you know what? Even the ChatGPT fanboys couldn't really argue with him this time. The improvements were incremental at best. Sure, it was faster and cheaper. But that's not what people were promised. They were promised a revolution. They got an evolution, and barely that now. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Sam Altman's response to all this criticism tells you everything you need to know about where OpenAI is right now. Back in January 2025, Altman wrote on his blog, "We are now confident we know how to build AGI as we have traditionally understood it." Big claim, right? We figured out AGI, we just need to build it. But then GPT-5 launches and gets torn apart, and suddenly Altman's tune changes. He starts saying things like, AGI is not a super useful term, and nobody really knows what AGI means anyway. Wait, what? You went from we know how to build it to the term doesn't even mean anything in less than 6 months? That's what we call in the business a strategic retreat. Or, if we're being less charitable, a complete backpedal. And it's not just me saying this. Gary Marcus pointed out that Altman is essentially adopting the cautious language that Marcus himself has been using for years. The guy who called Marcus a troll is now sounding like Marcus. You can't make this stuff up. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about money. Because OpenAI's financials are absolutely wild. And not in a good way. In the first half of 2025, OpenAI pulled in $4.3 billion in revenue. That's massive, right? That's real money, except here's the thing. In that same period, they lost somewhere between $7.8 billion and $8.5 billion. Let me say that again so it sinks in. They made $4.3 billion and lost about double that. That's not a business. That's a bonfire of venture capital money. Now, where is all that money going? Well, buckle up because this gets insane. They spent $6.7 billion on research and development in just 6 months. They burned through $2.5 billion in cash. Their salary bill alone, over $3 billion. And get this, about 50% of their revenue goes to inference costs. Just the cost of running the models when users ask questions. Another 75% goes to training costs. And yes, I know those numbers add up to more than 100%. That's exactly the problem. See, OpenAI isn't just unprofitable, they're structurally unprofitable. Their cost structure doesn't make sense, and it gets worse. They're projecting that they're going to lose $44 billion between 2023 and 2029. $44 billion. They don't expect to be profitable until 2030. Now you might be thinking, wait, but OpenAI is valued at like $300 to $500 billion. How does that make sense if they're bleeding money? And that's the right question to ask. The answer? Pure, unadulterated hype. Investors are betting that OpenAI will eventually dominate the AI market so completely that these losses won't matter. They're betting on a future monopoly. But here's the problem with that bet. Right now, 95% of ChatGPT's 800 million users don't pay a dime. Only about 40 million people pay the $20 monthly subscription. That means 760 million people are using the service for free. And every single query from those free users costs OpenAI money, real money, GPU time, electricity, data center costs. It all adds up, and this isn't sustainable. You can't give away an expensive product for free and expect to make it up in volume. That's not how economics works. Eventually, OpenAI is going to have to either start charging these free users, drastically cut costs, or find another way to monetize them. Which brings us to their next controversial move. In October 2025, Sam Altman announced that starting in December, ChatGPT would allow verified adult users to generate erotica, basically sexual content in text form. Now, Altman framed this as treating adults like adults. He said they made ChatGPT restrictive initially because of mental health concerns, but now they have better tools and can safely relax restrictions. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable, right? Adults should be able to use AI however they want, within reason. But let me give you some context that makes this decision look a lot more cynical. OpenAI is burning about $1 billion per month. They need to keep users engaged. They need to keep that user count high to justify their insane valuation. And you know what? There's a huge market for AI companionship and AI intimacy. A Harvard Business Review survey in April 2025 found that companionship and therapy was the single most common use case for AI chatbots. People are using AI to talk to confide in, to emotionally connect with. ARK Invest reported that adult-focused AI platforms captured 14.5% of the market that used to belong to OnlyFans, up from just 1.5% the year before. That's an almost tenfold increase in 1 year. And Elon Musk's Grok chatbot already offers edgier, more suggestive responses. Character, AI, and Replica have built entire businesses around AI companionship, including romantic and sexual interactions. So OpenAI looks at this and thinks, we're leaving money on the table? But here's the thing that really bothers me about the timing. Just 1 day before Altman announced this policy change, California Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill that would have imposed strict restrictions on AI companies to protect minors. 1 day, and then suddenly OpenAI is like, hey, we're going to allow adult content now. Coincidence? I don't think so, and neither do child safety advocates. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation came out swinging against this decision. They pointed out that age verification isn't perfect, that synthetic intimacy causes real harm even to adults, and that the risks of dependency and exploitation are very real. Look, I'm not here to be a prude. If consenting adults want to use AI in whatever way they choose, that's their business. But when a company that's burning $1 billion a month and desperate for engagement suddenly decides to open the floodgates to adult content, you've got to question the motivation. Is this really about user freedom? Or is it about keeping users hooked so they can justify their valuation to investors? Now, while all this drama is unfolding at OpenAI, something fascinating is happening over at Anthropic. They're not making big splashy announcements. They're not hyping AGI. They're just quietly building the best damn AI models out there. On September 29, 2025, Anthropic released Claude Sonnet 4.5. And let me tell you, this model is an absolute beast. It's not just good at coding, It's the best coding model in the world. Period. On SWE-bench verified, which tests real-world software engineering tasks, it hits 77.2% accuracy with parallel test time compute that jumps to 82%. For context, GPT-5 is nowhere near these numbers. But the really crazy stat is this. Claude Sonnet 4.5 can work autonomously for 30 hours. 30 hours? That means you can set it loose on a coding project in the evening. Go to sleep, wake up the next day, and it's still cranking away, building your application, maintaining context, staying on task. To put that in perspective, Claude Opus 4, which came out just 4 months earlier in May 2025, could only work autonomously for about 7 hours. So in 4 months, they more than quadrupled the autonomous working time. That's not incremental improvement, that's a breakthrough. And the real-world results back this up. One customer reported that Claude Sonnet 4.5 ran continuously for 30 hours and built a complete full-stack web application. Not just the code. We're talking about setting up databases, purchasing domain names, configuring servers, and even performing a SOC 2 audit to ensure security compliance. All of this autonomously, with minimal human oversight. The CEO of Cursor, one of the most popular AI coding tools, said Claude Sonnet 4.5 represents state-of-the-art coding performance with significant improvements on longer horizon tasks. The president of Replit called it the best frontier model for the capability over latency ratio. Even GitHub Copilot, which has its own models, switched to using Claude because the improvements were too significant to ignore. And here's what really matters. Anthropic's Claude Code, their coding agent product, is generating $500 million in annual run rate revenue. $500 million from a single product. And this is from a company that's younger and smaller than OpenAI. Now let's talk about the money situation at Anthropic. Because it's revealing, they're losing money too, about $3 billion in 2025. That's still a lot of money, but compare that to OpenAI's $8 billion loss. Anthropic is 2.7 times more efficient with their capital. They're burning less money while building better products. That's called having your priorities straight. And their strategy is completely different from OpenAI's. While OpenAI is chasing consumer scale and now pivoting to adult content for engagement, Anthropic is laser-focused on enterprise customers and developers. They're not trying to be everything to everyone. They're trying to be the best tool for serious work. The results speak for themselves. Apple uses Claude internally. So does Meta. When you think about it, these are companies that are extremely careful about their reputation and their security. They could use any AI model they want. They chose Claude. That tells you something about trust, and Anthropic is doubling down on safety and alignment. They call Claude Sonnet 4.5 their most aligned frontier model yet. It's less sycophantic, meaning it doesn't just tell you what you want to hear. It's more resistant to prompt injection attacks. It's more reliable. While OpenAI is making controversial moves into adult content, Anthropic is building a reputation as the trustworthy AI company. Now, let's talk about the sleeping giant that's finally waking up. Google. Because Google's comeback story in 2025 is actually pretty remarkable. In March 2025, Google released Gemini 2.5 Pro, and it immediately shot to number 1 on the LM Arena leaderboard with an ELO rating of 1470. But more importantly, it dominated the Web Dev Arena leaderboard at 1443, which measures a model's ability to build aesthetically pleasing and functional web applications. The benchmark numbers are genuinely impressive. On AIM 2025, that's a high school math Olympiad, it scored 87%. On GPQA Diamond, which tests deep scientific knowledge, it hit 84%. On Humanity's Last Exam, which is designed by experts to test the absolute frontier of human knowledge and reasoning, it scored 18.8%. That might not sound huge, but it's the highest score out there. And this benchmark is intentionally designed to be nearly impossible. And then there's the context window. Gemini 2.5 Pro can handle 1 million tokens, with 2 million coming soon. Just to give you a sense of scale, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy is about 750,000 words, which would fit in a single query. You can literally throw an entire code base or a complete book series at this thing and it can reason about all of it. Google also introduced Deep Think mode, which is an enhanced reasoning system for extremely complex problems. It scored impressively on the 2025 USAMO, one of the hardest math competitions in the United States. This isn't your average chatbot anymore. This is a system that can tackle problems that would stump most professionals. At a Salesforce event, Google CEO Sundar Pichai finally admitted something that everyone suspected. When ChatGPT launched in late 2022, Google already had a chatbot ready to go. They had massive AI investments lined up, but they didn't launch because they were worried about reputation risk. Was it good enough for the Google brand? Would it embarrass them? So they held back, and in that hesitation, OpenAI seized the entire market narrative. ChatGPT became synonymous with AI chatbots. Google had to call a code red internally, scramble teams, and rush Gemini to market, but now Google is playing the long game, and they've got advantages nobody else has. They're building their largest AI hub outside the US in India, powered mostly by clean energy, with submarine cables connecting it to the rest of their infrastructure. They've got their own chips, TPUs, so they're not dependent on NVIDIA. They've got Google Cloud Platform, giving them virtually unlimited compute, and they've got distribution through search, Android and YouTube that nobody else can match. Gemini 3.0 is confirmed for late 2025, and if current trends continue, it's going to be a monster. Google may have been slow to the party, but when they show up, they bring the whole infrastructure, so that's the landscape. OpenAI struggling with a disappointing GPT-5, bleeding money, making controversial pivots. Anthropic quietly dominating with Claude, winning enterprise customers, building trust. Google waking up and leveraging massive infrastructure advantages. But let's dig deeper into why OpenAI is really struggling, because there are fundamental problems here that go beyond one bad launch. First, the economics just don't work. And I mean they really don't work. Let me break down OpenAI's spending in the first half of 2025 so you can see how insane this is. They brought in $4.3 billion in revenue. Great. But they spent $6.7 billion on R&D alone. That's 156% of revenue just on research and development. Then there's inference costs, running the models, which ate up about 50% of revenue. Training costs ate up another 75% of revenue. Salaries? Over $3 billion now. You're probably noticing something weird here. Those percentages add up to way more than 100%. That's not an error, that's the problem. OpenAI is spending more than twice what they're making, across multiple categories simultaneously. And here's the thing that should really worry investors. These costs aren't going down. Everyone keeps saying, oh, costs will come down, efficiency will improve, but the data doesn't support that. Inference costs are actually going up because models are getting bigger and more complex. Training costs are going up because they need more compute for each new model. Salaries are going up because there's a talent war in AI. Perplexity AI, another AI search company, spent 164% of their revenue paying AWS, Anthropic, and OpenAI. Think about that. They made $1 and spent $164.4. That's not a business model. That's a Ponzi scheme funded by venture capital. And the deeper problem is what Gary Marcus has been saying since 2022. Scaling is hitting diminishing returns. You can't just throw more data and more compute at these models and expect exponential improvements anymore. You get incremental gains. GPT-4 to GPT-5 wasn't a quantum leap. It was a step forward. Sure, OpenAI is experimenting with test time compute. That's what their O3 and O4 mini models use, where the model spends more time thinking before responding, and it helps, especially for math and coding. But it's expensive as hell. And it only really works well in domains where you can generate synthetic training data easily. For open-ended stuff, creative writing, business strategy, complex reasoning about ambiguous situations, test-time compute doesn't give you the same gains. And that's a fundamental limitation that throwing more money at the problem won't solve. Meanwhile, the competition is catching up fast. In 2022, OpenAI was so far ahead it wasn't even funny. By 2023, Anthropic and Google were starting to close the gap. By 2024, Claude 3.5 was on par with GPT-4 in many tasks. And now, in 2025, Claude Sonnet 4.5 is outright beating GPT-5 in coding, which is one of the most important use cases. Every 6 months, Anthropic releases a model that can handle tasks twice as complex as before. Google is on a similar trajectory. OpenAI still has strong brand recognition and better UX, but in terms of raw capability, they're not the clear leader anymore. And when your $500 billion valuation is based on the assumption that you're going to maintain technological dominance, losing that lead is existential. And then there's the trust issue. The GPT-5 launch wasn't just a technical failure, it was a trust failure. Users felt deceived. They thought they were using this powerful new GPT-5 model. but they were actually getting bounced between different models without their knowledge. The model router was opaque. Performance wasn't consistent, promises weren't kept. Developers were furious because API behavior changed without warning. Pricing became more complex, and the model they were building their products on top of wasn't reliable. When you're building a business on top of someone else's API, reliability is everything. OpenAI broke that trust, and Sam Altman's personal credibility took a hit too. He went from AGI is imminent to AGI isn't really a useful term. From GPT-5 we'll have PhD-level reasoning to, well, it's better in some areas. The backpedaling was so obvious that even loyal supporters started questioning whether they could believe future promises. So what happens now? What's OpenAI's path forward? Well, Sam Altman is pivoting hard. Instead of talking about AGI, he's talking about AI agents, systems that can do work autonomously on behalf of users. He's talking about memory, making ChatGPT remember your preferences and context across conversations. He's even talking about neural interfaces, which is basically reading your thoughts. I'm not even kidding. OpenAI is reportedly starting a brain-computer interface company with Jony Ive, the guy who designed the iPhone. To compete with Elon Musk's Neuralink, they're also preparing to IPO. They need to convert from their weird capped profit non-profit structure to a regular for-profit Delaware corporation. The target valuation? $500 billion, but here's the problem. They're burning $1 billion a month. Can they even survive long enough to IPO? And if they do, can they justify that valuation to public market investors who actually care about profits? Meanwhile, Anthropic isn't chasing the consumer market at all. They're focused on enterprise and developers, and it's working. About 77% of prompts to Claude's API are users asking it to perform tasks, not just give advice. That's the hallmark of a tool that's actually useful in production environments. Claude is becoming the default choice for serious work, and that's where the real money is. And Google's playing the infrastructure game. They've got data centers worldwide, their own chips, their own cloud platform, their own distribution through search and Android. They might have been late to the AI chatbot party, but they've got resources to compete for the long haul that nobody else can match. When you can spend $10 billion on a new data center without batting an eye, you're playing a different game than everyone else. Which brings us to the trillion-dollar question. Is this whole AI thing a bubble? Let me give you both sides of this argument, because it's more nuanced than the Twitter hot takes would have you believe. Arguments for yes, this is a bubble. OpenAI is projected to lose $44 billion before turning profitable in 2029. Anthropic is losing $3 billion a year. A McKinsey report found that 8 out of 10 companies implementing AI saw no substantial profit increases. Only about 3% of consumers actually pay for AI services. These valuations are based on future promises, not current reality. That sounds an awful lot like the dot-com bubble. Arguments for no. This is not a bubble. AI actually works. It's useful. It's changing how people work and learn and create. Usage is growing exponentially. ChatGPT has 800 million users. Enterprise adoption is increasing. The infrastructure being built will have lasting value regardless of which companies survive. And unlike the dot-com bubble, AI companies are actually making real revenue. Not just hoping to make revenue someday, my take. It's both. There are absolutely bubble elements here. Some of these valuations are insane. Some of these companies are going to fail spectacularly. There will be a correction, but there's also real value being created. AI is genuinely useful. It's not going away. What's going to happen is something like the dot-com crash, but less severe. Not every AI company will survive. A lot of startups that are currently hot will disappear, but the companies with real moats, real customers, sustainable economics, and genuine technological advantages will survive and thrive. The question is, which companies are those? OpenAI has the brand and the user base, but their economics are broken and their technological lead is shrinking. Anthropic has the best technology and the enterprise trust, but they're smaller and still burning money. Google has the infrastructure and the resources, but they've been slow to move and their track record with new products is spotty. If I had to bet on who comes out on top 5 years from now, I'd put my money on a scenario where all three coexist but serve different markets. Google dominates the integrated AI experience, AI in search. In Android, in YouTube, Anthropic dominates enterprise AI for serious work, and OpenAI either successfully pivots to agents and devices, Or they get acquired by Microsoft for a fraction of their current valuation. But here's what I know for sure. The era of OpenAI's unquestioned dominance is over. The era of believing Sam Altman's AGI hype is over. We're entering a new phase where execution matters more than promises, where sustainable economics matter more than growth at all costs, and where trust matters more than hype. The AI wars of 2025 taught us something important. You can't hype your way to success indefinitely. Eventually, you have to deliver. Eventually, the economics have to make sense. Eventually, trust matters more than marketing. Gary Marcus was right. Not about everything. AI is more capable than he sometimes gives it credit for, but about the fundamental limitations of just scaling up LLMs, about the unsustainable economics, about the dangers of overpromising. The industry is learning those lessons the hard way, and you know what? That's actually good for all of us. Because the companies that survive this shakeout are going to be the ones that actually build useful, safe, economically viable AI, not the ones with the best hype machines. So if you're a developer, my advice is simple. Learn to use multiple tools. Don't put all your eggs in the OpenAI basket. Claude is legitimately better for a lot of coding tasks. Gemini has advantages for other use cases. Diversify. If you're an investor, look at the fundamentals. Who's got sustainable unit economics? Who's got real customer traction beyond free users? Who's got a defensible moat? Because the easy VC money phase is ending, and the show me actual profits phase is beginning. And if you're just a regular person using these tools, enjoy the competition. We're getting better products because these companies are fighting tooth and nail for market share. But remember, when something is free, you're the product. OpenAI's free tier isn't charity. It's a user acquisition strategy that they'll eventually need to monetize, probably through your data or by raising prices once you're hooked. The AI revolution is real, but it's not going to look like the fairy tale Sam Altman was selling. It's going to be messier, slower, and more economically constrained than the hype suggested. And honestly, that's probably for the best, because sustainable revolutions that actually improve people's lives are better than hype bubbles that crash and burn. We're living through history here. The AI wars of 2025 will be studied in business schools for decades, not because OpenAI won, but because they showed us what happens when hype meets reality. And reality, as they say, always wins in the end. Thanks for watching. If you found this valuable, hit that subscribe button. And remember, in the age of AI hype, skepticism isn't negativity, it's wisdom. See you in the next one.